Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 36 of Chess Basics, things every chess player ought to know. Today we're going to look at bishop endgames, and if you remember a little bit from 2 episodes back, episode 34 I looked at pieces versus piece versus pawns versus the piece, where the piece was the bishop, and you'll see a lot of the same principles apply, and so we'll come across that as we're going through it. And now, the bishop endgames in general separate into 2 classes according to whether the bishops are on the same color squares or on the opposite colored squares. So this is a case where white's bishop is on the dark squares and black's bishop is on the light squares. And so this is called opposite colored bishops case. And these endgames with the opposite colored bishops are often very drawish. And you can see it here. This one is a draw. And the reason is pretty simple. Just like in the case of pawns versus a piece, when the bishop covers the queening square or a square that the pawn has to go through, and if it can't be chased off, then it's going to be a draw, because at some point the pawn just has to be pushed and the bishop will sacrifice itself for the pawn. White can try different things. He can move the bishop around, but basically black doesn't need to do anything. He can move his king around or he can move his bishop around. It doesn't really matter. At some point, white is just going to have to push this pawn to make progress, and then black can grab it. So you can see that's the basic problem with the opposite colored bishops, is they don't interfere with each other. They cross right through each other. Hey, let's erase that line. So the bishops just cross right through each other, but they don't touch. So they can't interfere with each other's moves, and so that means this bishop has an unrestricted view of the squares that this pawn needs to go through to become a queen. Okay, let's take a look at the next case. But just because opposite colored bishop endings are usually drawn doesn't mean they're all drawn. They just have a drawish tendency. So this is a case. White has 1 pawn extra. He has 2 pawns versus black's 1 pawn. So he has 1 extra pawn, and he has opposite colored bishops. So black might think, well, it's just 1 pawn advantage. Surely I can hold it off now that we have the opposite colored bishops case. But it's not true. This is a win for white. And you'll see it if I move forward a few moves. White is just going to try and queen this pawn, force black to sacrifice his bishop, and then promote the other pawn. So while black can hold things off for a while, he can promote this pawn to a queen, force white to give up his bishop, trade his bishop for the queen. But his king is out of play now, and it's white's turn to move. And he can just go ahead with his plan. This is very similar to a case where you saw 2 pawns versus a bishop can often win if the pawns are widely separated and the bishop has to go after one of them, and then the other one can become a queen. So similar kind of case. This pawn became a queen, and so the bishop couldn't stop both of them, and the king was too far away. So if we go back to the beginning of this position, it's just a win for white, and there's nothing black can do about it. He could try, after king d7, he could try moving his king in right away, just ignoring this pawn, because it's not really doing him any good. But it's still too slow. Takes. King comes forward, but then this pawn runs, and he's still 2 steps behind. So just not going to get anywhere with that one. Okay, so let's take a look at another case. This case is very similar to the previous one. I just removed this pawn over here, so black has no pawns at all. But I put his king in a much better spot in front of the pawns and coordinating with his bishop to stop these pawns. And this case is actually a draw, although it's not an easy draw. But it just goes to show that you can even stop 2 pawns when you have opposite colored bishops if you're in the right position and if the pawns are close together. As the pawns become more widely separated, as you know from the previous video, widely separated pawns are more powerful against a minor piece like a bishop or a knight. So as the pawns are more widely separated, white has lots more winning chances. But when the pawns are close together and black's pieces are in a good position, he has a chance to hold a draw. So let's look at a few tries here. White might bring his king over to try and help this pawn promote, and black doesn't want to move his king at all. It's in an ideal spot. But he can move the bishop back and forth on this diagonal. That's a key feature. And so he can chase the king around. He can put the bishop in front of the pawn. Now, black could try and get his bishop out of the way. White could try and get his bishop out of the way and bring his king over like this. So he gets to this square. But even this doesn't work because when he promotes the pawn, bishop takes, king takes, and there's just not enough material left to mate. So black is still winning. So that's the basic plan, is to sacrifice your bishop for one pawn and grab the other pawn with your king. But you can't leave the bishop on the board and the pawn on the board, or you'll end up losing. You have to manage to get rid of both pawns, or get rid of the bishop and one pawn and have a drawn king and pawn ending. Now, there are other tries here. I didn't present the whole picture, and I'm not going to. But in this position here, we step forward. Instead of pushing the pawn, which we saw ends up in a draw, white could try this strategy, where he tries to get his bishop to f8, defending the pawn, and then push the other pawn forward. So that means that white's bishop won't be able to sacrifice itself for this pawn. But this turns out to still be a draw, and I won't go through every possibility here. I'll just give you some idea. One key idea is to get onto this diagonal to stop the pawn from coming forward, and also to put pressure on this pawn. This pawn is not moving anywhere, and the bishop is already in an ideal spot. But if you can get to this position here with the bishop here, stopping it from going any further, there's just not enough room for white to maneuver his king around and to make a queen here. He can't help this pawn promote because black can put his bishop right here, stop the king from getting any closer. So this has to do, the draw has to do with how close together the pawns are and how crowded it is over here in this corner. So the draws are there. You may have to look for them, and I didn't do an exhaustive analysis of that one because I wanted to talk about other things in this video. But it's an interesting position for you to set up and play around with if you want to learn more about how to draw with the king and a bishop against two pawns. And so just remember, when the pawns have to be close together in order to have drawing chances. If they're far apart, then you're probably losing. Okay, but I wanted to go on, and now this is our first bishop ending with same colored bishops. I wanted to talk a little bit about this because white has a lot more winning chances with his extra pawn when the bishops are the same color, and this one shows the basic technique. So it's white's turn to move. White needs to get his bishop to this square here to block out black's bishop. And so he's going to follow a path like this. So bishop to f5. And the king comes forward to try and stop the bishop from getting into a dangerous spot, but he's too late. And so this is just winning for white. There's nothing black can do at this point. He can trade bishops, but then this becomes a queen anyway. So a pretty simple win. You just have to remember, basically, you want to interfere with your opponent's bishop using your bishop, and this is why the same colored bishops you have better chances, because you can do this kind of interference. So let's take a look at the next case. It gets a little trickier as the pawn moves out towards the center. It's sort of easiest when it's a rook pawn. When their pawn is further away from the side of the board, there's now two diagonals from which this bishop could try and defend. It can defend on this side and it can defend on this side. So white, first of all, wants to chase the bishop away from this good post on this diagonal. So it goes to the square c8. Now black brings the king in and then bishop to c8. And now this bishop has to move. And it's got to go to a square which can reach both diagonals. So this move is good. Now it can go to either this square or this square, depending upon what white does, and have a chance of stopping that pawn. So the interesting move here is king a7, basically just taking control of this whole diagonal. After black moves, then the bishop can come out pretty much anywhere along this diagonal, and now black's bishop is totally blocked out. White's king is controlling this diagonal, and white's bishop is controlling the other diagonal, so there's no way to stop the pawn from becoming a queen. And so white will win this game. So go back and look at the beginning. So that's the key idea here. Get your bishop in front of the pawn to chase black's bishop away, and then try and control both diagonals, one with your king and one with your bishop. So let's look at this case. You might think if black's king is close enough in that it has a chance to to stop this pawn from becoming a queen by helping his bishop. But it doesn't work, and this is kind of an interesting trick. So white does the same thing. He brings his bishop in here, and now this bishop wants to stay on the diagonal so it can control this. If it ever leaves, the pawn is just going to promote. So the bishop goes to c8, and now the bishop goes to f1 so it can reach the other diagonal, and the bishop comes out along this diagonal. So there's two diagonals here, and white's controlling one of them, so the bishop has to go to the other one to stop that pawn from becoming a queen. And now white has the move king a7. Very interesting move because it puts black into Zugzwang, and Zugzwang is a common theme in many endgames. It means it's German for move compulsion. Zug is move and Zwang is compulsion. So black is forced to move, and he doesn't want to. He has no good moves here. The bishop, if it moves away on this diagonal, then white will just queen the pawn. If it moves on this diagonal, then white will just take the bishop and then queen the pawn. And so the bishop has no good moves. And where can the king move? Let's erase those. So the king can't come here because the white's king is blocking that. And it also can't come to this square because of the bishop. So this bishop d7 move is very precise. It not only controlled this diagonal, but it controlled this square. So the only move the king has is here, and then white can just grab the bishop. So whatever move black makes at this point, he's going to be losing the bishop. And so this endgame is also a win for white. So it has to do with the good position of white's king and being able to maneuver his bishop in front of the pawn, chasing the black bishop away. Okay, so let's look at one more case. Now this is the most difficult one when the pawn is in the center. There's the most latitude. Black has lots of squares to get to on both sides of the pawn. So let's see if white can win this one. Starts out with bishop to b6 to get in front of the pawn as usual, and black brings his king up here, chasing the bishop away, and the bishop goes to a square that can reach both diagonals. The bishop goes now to this move, to this square c7, staying on this diagonal. So the bishop is forced, black's bishop is forced back to this diagonal to stop the pawn from queening. And now white has the very nice move, bishop to d6. And so this puts black once again in a difficult position. If his bishop moves away, then the pawn will queen. But if the bishop stays on this diagonal, then, and that's the line I have here, then white is going to play the move bishop to e7. Just like in the case with the rook pawn, if the bishop can get in front of the pawn, then this bishop has to move away, and the pawn will become a queen, or trade, or the king move. It doesn't matter. This pawn is becoming a queen no matter what black does. So this is winning for black. I mean for white, because that pawn is becoming a queen no matter what black does. Okay, so let's look at the next position. This shows how close black has to be in order to stop this. So now this is a draw, and that's because his king is close enough to control some key squares. So if, well, white's going to play the move bishop b6 as normal, just trying to get in front of the pawn here. If the bishop stays on the diagonal, then bishop d8 chasing it away. The bishop can drop back here so it can reach either diagonal. Wants to be able to go in either direction. The bishop goes to c7 like in the previous example, and now the bishop can just go back to where it was. And we don't have the move bishop to d6 anymore, threatening bishop to e7 blocking. So there's other tricks white can try. He can play this move, which is kind of tricky. And so you have to remember not to take the bishop. You just need to stay on this diagonal. It's more important to prevent the queen than to take a bishop. And the bishop can come around this way. But now the king can step forward, and now the bishop, even though it can get all the way to f8, it can't ever get to this key e7 square. So this actually is the best defensive position for the black king. So if we go back to the beginning, there was actually a simpler way to defend. After here, bishop g5 is not the best move. The best move is actually just to move your king straight away to the square e6 and control both of these critical squares. And now, no matter what white does, he can't win this one anymore. He can try coming out on this side, and then the bishop goes and covers the other side. He can try attacking the bishop, but as long as the bishop remembers to stay on this diagonal, it's going to be fine. So that's it for the simple one pawn, bishop and pawn versus bishop case. You can often win these as long as black's king is a little bit out of play, using your bishop to chase your opponent's bishop away and just try and control the squares. Basic strategy is to chase the bishop off of the long diagonal and either prevent it from getting onto the short diagonal or block it on the long diagonal. So let's look at just one more case. No, I'm sorry. That was the last case. Okay, I thought I had a case with 2 pawns and 2 bishops, but no, that'll wrap it up for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.